Hello, everyone, and welcome to History Inscribed, Paper Assets, and the stories behind them. Now, today, we're looking at some rare colonial currency. This is a Georgia 1776 $10 note. This was paper money issued by the colony of Georgia, the young state of Georgia, to try to fund the Revolutionary War. And while many currency types have survived, this particular variety is quite rare. It's kind of a miracle that this survived. So we'll be talking about this today. We'll be going into some of the history. I'm not going to go deep into the history today as I'd like, because I plan to do a whole separate video just on the history of the Revolution relating to this note. So that will come at a later date, but we will talk about this. Let's talk about the acquisition first. So when you're buying graded collectibles, the acquisition isn't really all that interesting. You pretty much look at the price and buy it, and you can haggle a little bit depending on the seller. But when you're dealing with coins, currency, trading cards, they're graded by a third party, and that pretty much sets the price along with supply and demand. So this is a 25 out of 70 certified by Paper Money Guarantee. That's one of the two biggest paper money grading companies. The other would be PCGS, but coins and currency are graded on a scale of 0 to 70. So you might be saying, well, 25, that's not very good. Indeed, it's not, but it's all relative because this piece of paper is 250 years old. So relatively speaking, a 25 is acceptable for revolutionary currency, at least Southern revolutionary currency. Now, I said this was rare. There are about 9 graded examples of this particular variety, according to the official population reports. Now, I have seen quite a few up for auction, so I kind of think there may be more, but it's either that or they just keep getting passed around like fruitcakes. But yes, we have to put that into perspective, because when I say there are 9 of these, I mean the 76C variety. That means it was a $10 note with the orange palm tree seal, printed in 1776. Georgia and many other colonies, states used a variety of different symbols. Georgia used 5 different colors of ink per symbol. They used these intricate patterns. Sometimes up north they used a leaf pattern. They had actual men sign these, sit there and sign these bills. All this was anti-counterfeiting measures. Counterfeiting was a very big deal because if the money failed, the colonies would likely lose the war if they couldn't pay for soldiers, for supplies. So you'll even see on some of the northern bills, they wrote "death to counterfeiters" on the bills, and they were serious about it. It wasn't a joke. So all these measures here were to try to prevent counterfeiting. So if we look at the note itself, it is really just a piece of paper, but it says this certificate entitles the bearer to 10 Spanish milled dollars, or the value thereof, according to resolution of Congress. There are 5 signatures here. The more signatures you had, the larger the denomination. So these were local Georgia colonial officials. And from the top here, they are Benjamin Andrew. He was a prominent revolutionary leader from St. John's Parish. Today that's known as Liberty County, Georgia. and a member of Georgia's Executive Council. When they threw the British out of the colony, they formed the Georgia Executive Council, or sometimes it's called the Council of Safety, and that was essentially the state government. This is Samuel Saltus. He was also from Liberty County, or St. John's Parish as it was called at the time. This is William Evans, W.M. Evans, and he was commissioner and signer for colonial paper emissions. And then if we turn it, you can see the cross signatures here. This is William Ewen, E-W-E-N. He was the president of the Council of Safety and the first leader of revolutionary Georgia, equivalent to the governor, really, but they didn't call it the governor at the time. And then this is William O'Brien, O-B-R-Y-E-N. And he was a local Georgia patriot and merchant. So these men signed the currency as an anti-counterfeiting measure. Now, because the Georgia records are so sketchy compared to like the New England records, a lot of other more established colonies, there's not too much on these men. You'll get a mix of hearsay or legend and facts, and contradictory facts will come up too, but this particular bill doesn't have some of the bigger names that you might find on Georgia currency. There's no Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton, the men who signed the Declaration, the early governors. There's no James Habersham Jr. He was one of the more famous signers. But Samuel Saltus has an interesting story. Like I said, some of it is a mix of facts and legends, but I was able to find out something about Samuel Saltus, and he actually was connected to the ruling family or the founding family of Bermuda. And a branch of that family split off, moved to New England. And then, as many people who lived in Georgia at this time, they came from the other colonies. They came from the Carolinas, Virginia. So that branch of the family headed south. And Samuel Saltus lived in St. John's Parish, and they were Puritans. They were, Puritans that migrated down from New England. And so for them, independence was a religious issue. This was something they believed in through their religion. That's why they were so adamant about independence. And as I mentioned before, St. John's Parish, one of the original counties of Georgia, was actually renamed to Liberty County because that was the hotbed of the Patriot movement in Georgia. And it's still named Liberty County today. And in fact, when the British retook the South, it was one of the first places they hit was Liberty County and burned the church there, where these Congregationalists or more modern day Puritans had set up the anti-British movement there on the outskirts of Savannah. So very interesting. This seal, the millstone on palm, is one of the more interesting seals. Georgia had some great seals. I think most of them they didn't really come up with. They borrowed from the North and other older, more established colonies, but they had the good sense to use them, and it makes for some great artwork. There's also the rattlesnake, the red stag, the frontiersman, the liberty cap, floating jugs. And the idea behind the floating jugs was a little saying that went along with it. It was something like, if we don't float together, we will crack or crash and break. And I think it's more interesting than the eagle and stars. That's pretty much all we get nowadays. So it's kind of amazing that 250 years ago, when they were worried about the British Army advancing on them and all these other problems that went along with independence, they still had time for good artwork. Now you'll notice up here, there is no serial number. If you look at the top, it says serial number unknown. It doesn't say serial number none, because if you hold this up to bright light, you can actually see remnants of a serial number. So it was numbered. It's almost to the point where I can make it out, but not quite. I can't make out. I can guess at it, but I can't say for certain. But why this is important is because if there's no serial number, then the bill is known as a remainder. That means it was not issued into circulation. And remainders are generally not as valued collector-wise. So that's one of the good things about this. Why is the number not able to be seen? It's because the ink they used for the number was not as high quality as the ink they signed with and the rest of the ink that it was printed with. So over time, that ink has faded away. But it was numbered, and that means it did circulate. It was a $10 bill, which was the largest denomination, I believe, and because that was a lot of money, that may be why this tended to survive, because it was so much money back in the day. Now, these bills, they eventually hyperinflated, and by around 1778, they were having real problems in the colonies with the money being worthless. So both the money issued by the colonies as well as issued by the nascent federal government, the Continental Congress, the continental currency, all hyperinflated, went to zero. After the war, I believe they settled on a 10% buyback program where you could get, I think it was 10%. It was a very small amount where you could turn these in if you had any. And if you did that, of course, this would have gone out of circulation. You would have got a few pennies on the dollar. And, I don't know if that's how this bill survived, or if it was just placed in a family Bible or something, kept as a souvenir by a British soldier. Perhaps a Confederate soldier found it in the state archives when Sherman's march came through. We really don't know how this survived, but it is amazing that it did survive, because the British reconquered the South. Georgia was returned to royal control for several years, and if you had this on you, it would have been a very bad day if the British found you with this. So let's take a look at the back. On the back of these graded notes, this is where they put any of the problems that the bill may have. And so we see the problem that they've listed here is stained. And that's one of the lesser problems. So for a 250-year-old note, that's pretty good. It's very hard to find a problem-free note from one of the southern colonies. So nothing on the back except some stains. I think it's in pretty good shape. You may be wondering how much this is worth. So the current market value is around $1,000 to maybe $1,300. It depends if you're buying from, a retail seller or another collector who's just trying to get rid of it or auctioning it off. The higher grades for this note, I think the highest grade is a 35. So this is close to the top. The 35 would obviously command more than that. Maybe, I'm not sure, maybe up to like 2,000. So you're talking about a $1,000 to $2,000 note here, which I find very interesting because, as I said, this this bill went from being worth $10 in Spanish pieces of 8, that are Spanish milled dollars, right? And then it went to being absolutely worthless when the British retook the South. In fact, worse than worthless, right? Because you didn't want to be caught with this. And then the young federal government offered you, I think, 10%. So it might have been worth $1 equivalent. And then, over the years, as people started collecting these in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's when collecting of paper money kind of started as a institution, and now you have it, worth over $1,000+ So I just think it's interesting how a piece of paper can be valued so differently based on the time period it's in, and it's all really in our heads what it's worth. So very interesting. I think the broader issue here is, like, to zoom out and talk about like the meta issue, is that monetary policy in the US, it's always been a big deal. One of the issues the colonies had, it wasn't just taxation without representation, it wasn't just expansion westward. The British did not allow the colonies to coin their own money, to print their own money. There were some experiments with getting away with that, but for the most part, there was a lack of hard currency, gold and silver, in the colonies. It was difficult to pay for things. It was difficult to transact business at a higher level. There was a lot of barter, and the colonies, when they veered toward independence, really wanted this power to make their own money. And even after the country was established, we're not really taught about it through the public curriculum, but monetary policy was contentious all throughout America's existence. You had the First National Bank, all the national bank issues that were very contentious, that were kind of shut down in the Jacksonian era. You had William Jennings Bryan with free silver and all these different ideas of how monetary policy should be structured. Then you have the Federal Reserve era, which we're in now. And even today, hyperinflation or just inflation is becoming a bigger issue again, right? So that's what this kind of ties into in the modern era. What's old is new again. So we're still going through this era where we're wondering if our paper money is what it should be, and it's getting harder and harder to buy meaningful things with it. So it looks like it's nothing new. It's always been contentious, and there's always been problems with issuing money and making it work. So yeah, I think it's an interesting piece. I really like the artwork. On these. If you're interested in exploring more of the colonial currency or the continental currency, the two books are written by Friedman. One's by Friedman and one's by Newman. If you look up those names of the authors, and I think one's called The Early Paper Money of the U.S., and the other has a very similar name, you will start to get a grasp on what is out there. There's many different varieties. All the colonies printed money in some form, and depending on what survived, how rare it is, there's a lot of interesting currency to get into. Of course, when you do get into currency, it's not like some of the lower tier documents that we've looked at so far on the channel, because those, it's not really worth counterfeiting for the most part. There's too many details to get right. When you get into currency, you really want to make sure that it's graded. You're buying a graded and authenticated example, and you want to look into the grading system, understand the value of what you're buying. Look for terms like, if this says apparent, that is totally different than a clean grade. If it says very fine 25 apparent, that means that there are problems with it that kept it from getting a clean grade, but it is essentially 25 with problems. So you need to understand that as well, and just be familiar with the grading system. It's not too hard to get the basics down. Remember to look on the back, look for any comments up here, and really just take your time and focus on what you like, because there's a lot out there. So looking through either of those books will help you know just what's out there. And if this is a topic you're interested in, we can look at some more currency. I'm especially interested in the colonial currency, not so much the continental, but the continental's fine as well. And these are interesting collectibles. So yeah, hopefully if I have a chance, we'll do a deeper history dive into how this was actually printed and the story of the revolution in the South. And I think that'll be pretty interesting. But until then, I want to thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching History Inscribed.